Then we will do so here. First up, just wanted to give everyone a hello. I'm Heather McBee over at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center. Thank you. We're so glad you're here. Before we get into the program, I want to let you know a few steps on how things are going to work. Everyone's going to be muted except for the speakers during the call, but we will have Q&A at the end. So if you will just submit questions directly to me as the host, we will curate your questions and provide those to the speakers during the Q&A part at the end. And there's my video back for everyone. Next up, I'm just going to hand this off to Jane Allen, our CEO here at the Entrepreneur Center, to give you a proper welcome. Jane?
Yes, thank you so much. I really do appreciate, and I appreciate everyone being on today. I know that these are difficult times and times which we've never had to deal with. And so I want to thank, Will Cheek, I've known probably 30 plus years, and big fan of him personally, but also as a former practicing lawyer. I used to refer some clients to Will and work with him. And so respect him as a lawyer as well. And so when Will reached out and asked whether we would want to host something for the entrepreneurial community on the CARES Act, the answer was absolutely yes. And thank you, Will, for having the initiative and the wherewithal to even offer. And really do appreciate and look forward to hearing from you today. Also, I want to make sure everyone knows the Entrepreneur Center is a nonprofit here in Nashville that is here for the entire entrepreneurial community. And so we I've been there about 4 months, and as a former entrepreneur, I somewhat understand managing through a crisis, having lived through 01 and 08, and at the same time want to make sure that we are being a resource for you, the entrepreneurs. And so thank you for joining us today. Hopefully this is going to help all of us as we learn more about navigating the federal government and regulatory issues, as well as the CARE Act, obviously, in particular. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, and thank you again.
Well, thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate the kind words. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you folks. I'm an attorney at Waller. I do small business and small entrepreneur advice. I'm mainly here to ask a few questions and moderate, because I've got 2 experts here from Waller. One is Dustin Timblin. Dustin is a banking lawyer, and he's been immersed very deeply into the CARES Act and some pieces of it that have to do with lending. And then I also have Kierstin Jodway. Kierstin is a labor and employment lawyer, and she has been looking at both the CARES Act and the Families First. We're going to talk about 2 things today, and they're 2 completely different laws, and there's a lot of nuances here, a lot of complications, but sort of big picture, Congress has enacted 2 enormous sweeping laws. One of them is called Families First. It has the acronym FFCRA. It's Families First. The basic thing is Families First is about paid leave for employees. The idea behind it was, let's keep sick people from going to work. Let's make sure that if you need to stay home because of the coronavirus, whether that's because you're sick or because you're caring for someone who's sick, or maybe because you're homeschooling your child who is no longer at school because there's an executive order closing schools, that you're going to be able to get relief and your family's not going to go hungry. That's Families First. The second piece is the CARES Act. And the CARES Act is about loans and grants that are made directly to business. Under the CARES Act, the one that seems to galvanize a lot of attention in the business community is the Paycheck Protection Program, has the nifty acronym PPP. That's Paycheck Protection Program. So we're going to talk about both of those today. Let's kick it off first. Kierstin, why don't you give us sort of an overview of what Families First does?
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was muted. So the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, we'll call that the Families First Act or the FFCRA. It applies to even small businesses. It applies to any business with fewer than 500 employees. And there's essentially two parts of it. There's the emergency paid sick leave, and then there's an expansion of the Family and Medical Leave Act. So the emergency paid sick leave, it gives employees up to 2 weeks of paid leave if they are unable to come to work because they are sick with COVID-19, think they have COVID-19, caring for someone who has COVID-19, subject to an order that doesn't let them go to work, or is at home caring for a child whose school is closed because of COVID-19. So that's the first 2 weeks. And then there's an additional 10 weeks under the second part, the expansion of the family and medical leave. And that is only for employees who can't go to work because they're at home caring for a child whose school is closed. So for employers who are small businesses and have fewer than 50 employees, there is a potential exemption that you can try to fall within. And it's specifically for businesses who just can't provide this leave because it would just wreck their business, or they don't have another employee who can do this job. And so if that's a situation you're running into, then we can talk more specifically about that. But you'll want to document those reasons for not providing the leave. So it is paid leave, and the employer has to pay the leave, but then the employer is able to get that money back from the government through tax credits. And there's a lot of details on that that we can go into if that's something that you all are interested in.
Hey, Kierstin, tell us just a little bit about how the tax credit piece of it works. So you lay out the money in advance as an employer when your employee takes leave. How long is it going to take you to recoup it? How do you recoup it?
Yeah, so you can automatically withhold some portion of the taxes that you would normally deposit with the IRS for Social Security. And then if that doesn't cover the leave, then you can seek a refund through the IRS. And they're, setting up that process right now to try to get even potentially advances. But we just got guidance on that a couple days ago. So we're weeding through all of that. And our tax folks have also, they're about 95% done putting together a resource for employers on how to get that money.
Let me say this, on both the Families First as well as the CARES Act. CARES Act was signed by President Trump last Friday. Regs just came out from the SBA last night. There will be changes in the information. There'll be additional guidance. What you read about the CARES Act last week may be inaccurate because the law actually changed during the course of the week when it was passing. So I say all that to say, look for current information. If you're reading things on social media or on a government website, look at the date. If it's dated March 27, it's old, even though that's just a few days ago. So you want to get the most current information. And that's why Kierstin's saying, we're still looking at the guidance to figure it out. It's not that we're slow. It's just that it's coming out in huge amounts and it is changing fast. So anyway, Kierstin, go back.
Yeah, and on that point, the DOL issued some guidance. The Department of Labor, who's in charge of, that's the government entity in charge of enforcing the Families First Act, issued some guidance for employers last week. And then 2 days ago, we got more guidance that actually contradicts some of the original guidance. So even some of the information we're getting is changing from the government on a day-to-day basis. So it is important to make sure that the information you're getting is the most recent, and to make sure you're looking at reliable sources, because there's a lot of summaries out there that really are inaccurate or outdated.
So Kierstin, tell us a little bit about the CARES Act and what it does.
Yeah, so the CARES Act is 880 pages long, and there is a lot in there. That is the same law. You've heard about everyone getting checks from the government for $1,200. That's in the CARES Act. You've heard about unemployment expansion benefits. That's in the CARES Act. You've heard about small business loans, potentially free money. That's in the CARES Act. There's a lot in there. Dustin is our resident expert on the Paycheck Protection Program, which is, just to give a general overview of that, it's a loan you can get from your bank potentially, and if you use it correctly to pay your employees, then that portion of the loan can be forgiven. There's a lot of nuance there, and I'm sure you all have a lot of questions about that. And then I can also talk about the unemployment aspect of the CARES Act.
Hey, Kierstin. So I understand the Uber driver now qualifies for unemployment under CARES Act. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yep. So the unemployment expansion, one congressperson referred to it as unemployment on steroids, which is funny and sort of true. So unemployment was expanded in several ways. First, the CARES Act expanded who qualifies for unemployment. So traditionally, self-employed individuals, independent contractors could not get unemployment. Now they will be able to get unemployment. The second thing that was expanded is how much. I'm sure you've heard about the number $600 thrown around. That is true. The CARES Act has allocated an additional $600 per week to go to people who qualify for unemployment. And then also it expanded how long you can get unemployment. So that's usually a state by state thing, but most states it's 26 weeks, and the CARES Act upped that to 39 weeks.
So if I'm an independent contractor and I get unemployment, who's paying for it?
Part of that is going to come from the state, and part's going to come from the federal government.
But I don't have to, my business isn't paying for it, the government is.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
the important piece.
Yes. And some states so typically the way unemployment works is employers pay into the unemployment fund. Unemployment's not something that's just funded by the state. Employers get a bill for, their employees who file for unemployment. And so it's really largely employer funded. Now that it's been opened up to independent contractors, the government is going to be footing a lot of that bill. And some states have even come out and said that even small businesses and employers whose employees file for unemployment for COVID-19 reasons, employers aren't going to get charged for that. Tennessee hasn't said that yet, but Kentucky has, Minnesota has, and a few other states.
Well, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk about this Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. Dustin, why don't you give an overview of who this applies to and how it works?
Sure thing, Will. So the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, is a program where the government guarantees loans made by lenders as opposed to a direct application to the government. So the initial question is whether you're eligible is whether you have 500 or fewer employees. That makes you a small business. And when you consider your number of employees, that's to include full-time, part-time, or other status. And unless you're a restaurant, hospitality business, or a franchise, then you have to include your affiliates in that consideration. Now, talking about the affiliation rules are beyond the scope of this webinar, but generally speaking, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, affiliation exists when one business controls or has the power to control another, or when a third party controls both. So
suffice it to say that the affiliate rule only applies to larger businesses. If these are businesses that clearly startup, businesses, there's not going to be any affiliation issues there. It's just look at the number of employees, and if you've got under 500, which is a big entrepreneur organization, then you'll qualify.
Yes, unless you're a small business owner that owns multiple types of businesses, or you have majority control of both, then, but in the case of most small businesses, it's not going to be an issue. So if you have 500 or less employees and you were in operation on February 15th and had employees for which you paid salaries, you're eligible for a PPP loan. So there's no credit underwriting or ability to pay, or you there's no requirement to prove that you're going to be able to repay it. You just are eligible if you have met those circumstances. And the amount of the loan is tied to your average monthly payroll costs. So how is that calculated? It's, you can either take the trailing 12-month period's total payroll costs or the calendar year 2019's total payroll costs, divide that by 12 and multiply it by 2.5, and that results in your loan amount. It's that or the lesser of that, or $10 million. So what's considered payroll costs? I know that's a question we're getting a lot. So that includes compensation to your employees in any form: salaries, wages, commission, or similar compensation, including tips, payments for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, separation allowances, payments for provision of group health care coverage benefits, including insurance premiums related thereto, retirement contributions, and payments of state and local taxes assessed on compensation of employees, but not federal payroll or federal income taxes that you pay. And then if you're an independent contractor, a sole proprietor, you're looking at your wage, commission, income, or net earnings from self-employment. So that's payroll costs. So take that aggregate number for the past 12 months, divide by 12, multiply by 2.5. If you've been in business less than 12 months, you just take the number of months you've been in business, that average, and multiply it by 2.5. So is there anything explicitly excluded from the definition of payroll costs? Yes. If you pay compensation to an employee of more than $100,000 a year on an annualized basis, it's capped at $100,000 a year. That includes salary and benefits. And we already mentioned federal employment taxes and income taxes. So if you get the money, what can you use the loan for? You can use it for payroll costs, the types of things we just talked about: rent, interest on pre-existing debt, or utilities. And if you use that money on those particular purposes, within the 8-week period after you get the loan, then you can potentially get that forgiven. So how does that work? So after that 8-week period, you can apply to your lender again, and you will have to show that you used the money on those articulated purposes. And the government has actually just issued a new rule that says you have to stick to a ratio of 75% payroll, 25% other costs. So I guess what I mean by that is you have to spend a minimum of 75% of the loan on payroll if you want to get the whole thing forgiven.
Let me summarize that, because there's a lot of information there. So you take 2.5 times your average payroll for the preceding 12 months, and that's gross payroll. That's all benefits and the whole 9 yards. And that's your loan application. You file an application for an SBA loan through your bank. That's the best place to do it. When you're granted, they will give you the money. It's a loan. And if you use at least 75% of the money pays people. And
yes,
25% of it goes to rent, mortgage interest, not principal, utilities. If you shell that money out in 8 weeks, you apply and the government will forgive your loan, and it's free money. Is that right?
You're right so far. I want to add one important caveat on that, though, which is because the purpose of this law is to keep people employed and keep their wages maintained, there are 2 exceptions to that loan forgiveness piece, which is if your average full-time equivalent employee headcount is reduced during that 8-week loan period compared to either January 1st through February 29th of 2020 or February 15th through June 30th of 2019, at your option, whichever is more advantageous to you. if there's a reduction, then that percentage reduction causes a proportional percentage reduction in your loan forgiveness amount. Alternatively, if you reduce salary and wages of an employee that makes less than $100,000 a year by more than 25% during the 8-week period compared to the prior quarter's salary or wages, then any amount reduced above 25% are subtracted from your loan forgiveness amount. So let's say you reduce an employee's wages or salary by 30%, then that dollar amount of the 5% above 25% is reduced from the loan forgiveness amount.
In other words, you're going to have 5% of that's going to be a loan then. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah. I should make clear that you don't have to use all the money within the 8-week period. You just have to use it for one of those purposes. And if you want to get it forgiven, it has to be used within that 8-week period. And then let me add one more small detail, Will, and then I'll stop talking. There's a further exemption for those rules where you can disregard reductions in headcount or reductions in salary and wages of the type I talked about if you restore that headcount or those wages by June 30th of 2020. So that's the summary of the PPP program. I know it's complicated, but I think it is a very advantageous loan for small businesses.
So we were talking to Alan Valentine at the Symphony about this, and he loves it because he's going to get money to pay his staff, some of whom are not working. The orchestra by its nature is not rehearsing. The players are you rehearse alone, but that's the intent of the law. It is giving businesses money to either pay people to work, or if there's no work, to pay them not to work. And that's what you're supposed to do with the money. If you're going, why do I want this money? I can't pay my employees. That's the intent, is to allow you to be able to pay people not to work. It's great if you're paying them to work, but they don't have to actually be working. You just have to pay them. And the bonus is if you pay them, the government will forgive the loan, and it's free money. So it's a loan. Dustin, it's a good loan though, isn't it? You don't have to make payments for what, 6 months, and then the interest rate is what, like around 1% or something?
That's right. So from the time you get the loan, you're not going to have to pay any fees, first of all, and you're not going to have to pay any interest or principal for at least 6 months. And then the interest rate is a fixed rate of 1%, which is, very favorable compared to the typical, business loan. And then the maturity, if you haven't had it forgiven, it's 2 years from the loan date.
All right, so there's another SBA loan program that goes along with this too, and I forget the acronym. It's the disaster loan. What's the acronym?
EIDL.
That's catchy. Explain that program a little bit to us.
Okay. And I admit I'm not as big of an expert on EIDL, but my understanding of it is that's an acronym that stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And the difference between the EIDL and the PPP, are material and significant. So the EIDL is a program run through the government. So you apply on SBA.gov for an EIDL, and it's going to be a lot different than the PPP because it's not a formula-based calculation for your loan amount. It's just up to $2 million as determined by the Small Business Administration, and it is based off of your expected economic loss that is able to be directly tied to the coronavirus. So EIDLs have favorable terms as well. They're 3.75% fixed interest rate for 30 years. And the EIDL is not forgivable, unlike the PPP. but you can use the EIDL for most business purposes. You know, it's not restricted to those things we talked about for the PPP. The one caveat I want to mention to all of you is you cannot use the EIDL for the same purpose as the PPP. And the last thing I'll mention is the EIDL, if it's above $200,000, you still may have to provide a personal guarantee of the owner. And if it's above $25,000, you may still need to provide collateral. That's going to be up to the government and you working together to decide.
Hey, you raise a good point about the PPP. This is the payroll protection. There is no personal guarantee.
That's true. I didn't mention that before, but there's no collateral and no personal guarantee in the PPP.
And the other thing too is they don't look at your company and make a determination about whether or not you can pay it back. If you provide the documentation and you qualify for the loan, you get the loan regardless of the capacity to pay back. So
Exactly.
that's important for entrepreneurs. Even if you have zero credit, as long as you make this application, so provide the information that's required, and then you pay the money back the way it's supposed to be over that 8-week period, it's a grant, it's free money, even if you don't have normal credit that a bank would bank you on. So on the EIDL, there's one piece of it that I keep hearing about. There's the free $10,000. How the heck does that work, Dustin?
Yeah, so you can go on to SBA.gov and submit your application. And the law provides that within a very short period of time, I think they say it's 36 hours, but from what I'm hearing that it may be longer than that in practical terms. But within 36 hours, you're supposed to be able to get what's known as like a $10,000 loan advance that if you end up not qualifying for the EIDL later on, you do not have to repay. Except that if you also get a PPP loan, that $10,000 will be subtracted off of your loan forgiveness amount. But if you didn't get either, then it's just $10,000 free money, as long as you fill out the application and submit it on SBA.gov.
So right now, the SBA guidelines were issued last night. There are a lot of banks that are saying they're not taking applications yet. We are telling folks, bank with your bank. There are a lot of banks that won't take applications if you're not banking with them. If your bank is telling you they're not ready yet, that's one thing. If your bank is never going to accept these loans, you need to go somewhere else right away. If you are having problems getting the Paycheck Protection Program application, if it's not available on your bank, the other avenue is to try the EIDL. There's nothing wrong with having both applications pending. As Dustin said, if you get the 10 grand, they'll deduct it from your PPP loan. If you can't get the PPP or the money runs out, at least you got the 10 grand. Kierstin, am I missing anything here? Do you have any comments?
No, I do not.
So how do we throw this out for questions?
Hey, Will, I have a list of questions that people have been submitting via the chat, so I can pull those for you.
That'd be great.
You're ready to start answering questions. Real quick, could you reiterate what happens if you get both the PPP and the EIDL grant?
Dustin?
Yep, you can't use it for the same purpose. So
Okay.
if you're
What does that
planning on
mean?
using,
In practical purposes.
yeah, so unclear, but my practical advice is if you get both, then I would use the EIDL for, other operating expenses other than payroll or rent. And then if you run out of money or spend all the money on the PPP, then you can go back to using the EIDL to pay payroll and rent. But don't use it for the purpose.
So let's say I'm a startup business and I have a lot of internet development. Third-party contractor. I pay people to write code, and maybe to do other things. That's not something that would be PPP, but I could pay for that with my idle. Is that right?
Yeah. So in other words, you pay independent contractors and not employees.
Correct. And they're putting together, for lack of a better word, content, code.
Yeah, you can do that. Although I will tell you that I think that if a business wants to think about timing, that I would expect if you apply for both that you will probably get a PPP loan well before you get an EIDL.
Awesome. So then we have a lot of questions related to independent consultants and how to apply those to the PPP. So companies that are using independent consultants, how do they calculate the rate for them, as well as who qualifies within that?
Yep. So let me first say you cannot apply as an independent contractor or sole proprietor right now, and they have not issued regulations applying to independent contractors and sole proprietors as of this call. So what I'm going to tell you is kind of just purely based on the statute, which is broad, and the limited information I have thus far. So I think the difference for an independent contractor and sole proprietor is, you're not going to be providing payroll tax reports or payroll tax like Form 940 or anything like that. You're just going to have to prove your income and expenses for your business, from all sources. So the regulations say what qualifies as payroll costs for an independent contractor or sole proprietor: wages, commissions, income, or net earnings from self-employment or similar compensation. So that's the limited information I have for that so far. But
So on the PPP, Dustin, I think I'm correct on this. Independent contractors don't count as your payroll cost, right?
When you're thinking about it from the perspective of an entity, yeah.
Yeah, so if I'm applying, if I'm a business and I'm applying for the payroll protection program, and I'm calculating the amount of my payroll, the 2.5 times monthly payroll, I do not include independent contractors in there. Also, payments to independent contractors don't count in that 8-week period. And that's because independent contractors have a separate form of relief under the CARES Act, which the government doesn't have up and running right now, right?
You got it.
So if I'm an independent contractor, I want an idle loan, don't I?
You could apply for both. Yeah, I would go ahead and apply for the EIDL in the meantime. I think the government has indicated that the independent contractor and sole proprietor applications will open on April 10th. So I would expect the regulations to be issued next week to give us further detail on PPP. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But
so we were on a call with a banker earlier this morning on the idle loans. So the way it works is it is a more involved application than a PPP. But once you supply the documentation and you hit enter on the application, the government will send you a payment, and it's supposed to be 3 days, but it's 3 government days, which is more like a week is what we're hearing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have some basic fundamental questions too, which with the regulations for companies released last night, where does someone find those? And is there a benefit to waiting a few weeks to let everything settle down, or get it done now?
So get it done now. And the reason is that the expectation is that this money is going to run out. And the regs that were posted last night are like 120 pages. They're mostly guidance for lenders to know exactly what they're going to be looking for the application process. We say get your application in. If your bank will take it, put it in there. Your bank will tell you what they want. It's going to be your bank's best guess at what the rules are. The rules are going to change again. We're almost confident because there are a lot of questions in the 120 pages. As far as the money running out, we're telling people not to panic. If the money runs out under the PPP, that means that the program was enormously successful. Congressman Jim Cooper had a chat yesterday with some folks, and he indicated that if the program works as it's supposed to, it will run out of money. And yes, Congress will reconvene, and yes, they will fund more money. I'm not a congressman. I can't promise that'll happen. But the people that are in the know say that if there's demand for this, it works. And if it works, they'll put more money into it. So, but that said, I wouldn't wait. I'd go ahead and get your application in. If you think you want PPP money, as soon as your bank will take it, get it in.
How does someone find out which banks are doing this?
Well, I'm going to say go to your banker and tell them, give me the name of the person at your bank that will take this PPP loan. And if it's not today, let me know when it's going to happen. And if you're not sure you're going to be doing it, let me know that at ASAP. And then you go out and you start searching for banks.
So I will also chime in here to say any FDIC insured institution, bank or credit union is now eligible to provide the loans. They have to send in a form if they're not already a lender, but that's basically pro forma. So, you know, it's up to each bank whether they're not required to participate, but they're all going to be eligible.
Okay, and are there any special regulations around nonprofits?
Yeah, so if you're a nonprofit organization, you have to be, and you're wondering whether you still qualify or not. You have to be either a 501c3 or a 501c19, which is the veterans organizations. Those are the only two types of nonprofits that apply.
Or an Indian tribe, right?
Yeah, Indian tribe as well.
We have a lot of those in Tennessee.
But the affiliate rules still apply. It's probably not going to be as applicable for nonprofits because they don't have ownership. But, you know, depending on who controls the board, there may be something to look at there. But otherwise, they just slot into this program the same way that we've already talked about.
Right, and so that's a nonprofit with less than 500 employees, and that includes part-time and seasonal. If you've got questions about that calculation, feel free to email in, and if there are a number of questions, we'll go over that, but I doubt there are on this call. Let me tell you practically, if you are a nonprofit, when you start this application, there's a way to begin it as a nonprofit. Check that box. Once you've done that, you've indicated that you're a nonprofit. On the third page, it says ownership information. We've got a number of nonprofits that have said, well, who's my owner? I'm a nonprofit. So you'll notice that it says individual owner - agent. And what you want to do is you want to fill that out. And if you're the CEO of the nonprofit, you are an agent, or if you're the CFO or whatever, the president, you fill out that information, you indicate your ownership is 0%. If you do that, we think you've truthfully answered the application.
And what about nonprofits that receive grant funding that covers salaries and some of the other items that are eligible under the PPP?
So I would just make sure that you don't use the grant money during the 8-week period that you're supposed to be paying out the PPP money. As long as the terms of your grant allow you to pay salaries later, then that's not a problem. If your grant specifically says you've got to use it on salaries and you've got 100% of your salaries during 2020, and there's no way for you to use the PPP money, then it's going to be a loan, most likely, or it's going to be a violation of the terms of your grant. That's not good news. I think that's the best answer.
Okay. Questions about sole members of an LLC and partners in a company. How do they address and submit their salary when it goes out as a distribution to themselves rather than through employee payroll?
Kierstin or Dustin?
Yeah, that is a question we're getting a lot, and there's no answer at this time. I don't think they've decided yet whether they want to include like a K1 partner whether they classify that as a sole proprietorship or independent contractor. I think the intent is that it doesn't, but that's not something I can give you a definitive answer on at this time.
There's some
We're
folks
hoping that
go
those regulations will clarify that, though. So look out for those.
There are multiple people out there asking for clarity again on the PPP versus the EIDL or the EIDL and how that will work if you get them both or you only get one once you've applied for both. Can you touch on that again?
Well, so one of the things is that the EIDL is a longer application process. It's going to require a review. And so most likely you're not going to receive, you get to $10,000 in 3 government days. But the actual loan itself is going to come down the pipeline. So it's I think it'll be very common that you could use the PPP money over the next 8 weeks, pay your people, pay your rent, pay your utilities, pay your internet, and then you use the EIDL money going forward. Because it's not like 60 days from now, we're all going to wake up and we're going to go to football games with 60,000 people and life's going to be normal. This is probably going to have long-term impacts on your business. And so the thought is that the EIDL loans you'll be able to use them down the road. A lot of businesses will be able to. Dustin, did I miss anything there?
No, I think that's good practical advice. We don't know what changes will come in the future to this program, but I think based on the information we have now, that's the best approach.
Questions about tax submissions and the documentation that's need to be provided. This one's very specific, but thought I had read something about needing to show last year's taxes for PPP. If you deferred taxes last year, is it required to complete that before you can complete an app? Also, we bank with BOA, and it appears they are requiring small businesses to have an existing loan with them in order to apply for a PPP. Can they do that?
Dustin, you want to cover that first question? She
Hello?
said tax.
Can
Yeah.
you hear me? I think I got muted. Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can
Hi.
hear you.
Yeah, so there's no requirement for any bank to participate in the program. So maybe it makes bad business sense for B of A to not offer loans to other customers, but that's their option. And so nothing you can do about that other than just, think of a different lender.
Move your money
question-
to a bank that's friendlier.
Awesome.
Could you repeat the first part of the question?
The first part of the question is having to show last year's taxes for PPP. If you deferred taxes last year, is it required to complete that before you can complete an application?
No, I mean, I think each individual, there's no specific requirements for deliverables in the law or regulations. So each individual bank is going to have their specific requirements. I think that they're asking for Form 940 or 941, which are your payroll tax filings, and they're going to need to verify your employee counts. I don't know the answer. My guess is no, you don't need to complete your deferred tax returns, but I would just ask your banker specifically that question. There's no guidance one way or the other in the law or regulations about that.
Okay. For owners that do not get a W-2, i.e. they're the single member of the LLC, what do you use to prove your 2019 income? Or could you use 2018 to show the draws? So there's another one about draws and distributions.
Yeah, it's the same answer as before. If you don't pay yourself a W-2 salary, then at this point it's unknown whether you're counting distributions. You would apply on your own for your own benefit using your distributions. So you can't go back to 2018 though. It's just trailing 12 months or calendar year 2019.
Okay. This goes to the employee and unemployment. If an employee doesn't have an 18-month work history with a company, and previous work history with the company, is that limitation waived, and are they eligible for unemployment due to layoff from coronavirus in Tennessee?
Kierstin.
Yeah, so I can take that. So typically for unemployment, whenever employees or individuals are applying for unemployment, the office will want to know what your income was for the first 4 of the last 5 calendar quarters, which right now that would be all of 2019. So you're going to want to just gather whatever documents you can, tax documents, bank statements, invoices, whatever you have to show what your income has been for that last year. For individuals who were self-employed or independent contractors, Tennessee is still working on getting that guidance out for what they're going to have to provide in order to qualify for the unemployment. And then also updating the application, because if you've tried to go on there right now and file for unemployment, it won't let you unless you were like a W-2 type employee. So it's taking a couple days. Hopefully they'll have those changes and that guidance out early next week, but definitely stay on the website, keep trying, make sure you're registered so that once it's available, you can go ahead and apply, because just like with the Paycheck Protection Program money, like the unemployment money is gonna run out. We're gonna have the highest surge of unemployment claims we've ever had as a country.
Okay, we're going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions that have been submitted here. We own a restaurant. If employees who are on unemployment do not want to come back because they make more, and we live in a rural area where employee pool is very limited, will we be penalized because we cannot find employees to work?
Well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Kierstin.
Well, I'll say this on the unemployment portion. Those employees, anyone applying and receiving unemployment is going to have to certify on a weekly basis that they're seeking employment and trying to find a job. So if they're being offered work by the restaurant, they're going to run into some serious issues if they are not being honest about that.
Yeah, if an employer says, we're going to fund you coming back to work, and the person continues to accept unemployment, that's a violation of the unemployment laws. Is that right, Kierstin?
Yeah, that's right.
Dustin, do you have anything to add there?
No, I was just going to talk about, depending on if you get the loan forgiven, there, like I mentioned earlier, there are different look-back periods. So there are various options for, what you have to compare your head count to. But I think Kierstin and Will had kind of, cited the more pressing issue.
And Dustin, with the loan forgiveness portion, companies, they have to maintain their employee head count, but it doesn't have to be the same people, right? Or does it?
No, it does not. It's the law only refers to a generic head count. So that rehire exemption I talked about merely says that you need to restore the number of full-time equivalent employees, not that particular employees need to be hired back that have been terminated.
Let me say that there is federal oversight on this program. There's probably some pretty serious penalties. You probably play some golf in a federal prison for a while if you violate the lending parameters of these. I know you might want to work on your golf game, but it's really no fun, I hear. I would tell people, don't play games with this. If you're going to rehire people and the people that you're looking to, and I'm saying rehire, they're not actually coming back to work, but if you want to pay them under the PPP, you better make sure it's not all your cousins. I'd be very careful in that situation. If you really are bringing people back on your payroll, I think you probably are going to have some connection for how you're doing that. I don't think you can just pay your friends and consider that a PPP payment that's going to be, if anybody looked at it, they'd say that was fine.
Well, thank you, Will, Kierstin, and Dustin. This has been awesome. I realize we didn't get quite to everyone's questions, and there's a lot of information flying at you out there. Did you guys want to say anything to wrap things up here?
Well, I want to thank, in particular, Kierstin Jodway, Dustin Timblin, attorneys from Waller for doing this. They're volunteering their time at a time when they've got a ton of paying work. We know you guys' businesses are under a lot of stress. We appreciate you listening to us. If there's a way that we can help in the future and do something like this, we'll be glad to do it. Read current information. Make sure you're not looking at dated things, and make sure you're looking at information that comes from a reliable source. So that's it. Kierstin, Dustin, you have anything else?
Yeah, well, just thank you guys for having us. It's a pleasure to get to use our time to really help small businesses in our community. It's something we care about a lot. I was an entrepreneurship major at Belmont, so I see some familiar names as well. But if you're looking for reliable resources, we are 24/7 putting stuff up on the Waller website. We have a COVID-19 page where you can just look for content related to COVID-19, and we're constantly updating that.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I echo all that, and just, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Use your best available information and act in good faith. And that's all I have to say.
Well, Jane and Heather, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Jane, did you want to say anything to wrap this up?
Sure. I just want to thank you all again. Hopefully it was, I know it was very beneficial and helpful to me. And so hopefully it was to others on the call, but I really do. I know you all are really busy. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and the entrepreneurial community today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Yep,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Whew. Yes, how are you? Yeah, absolutely. And I sent everything to Margaret. So it's just really a matter of her going in and making that card payment on the link I sent. Okay, that's perfect. I'll watch for it. Okay. Bye.